Oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister is the best thing that could happen to Donald Trump. He's given up on market access for our main exports. He's lost our influence and handed over all the power to Trump. And he backs down whenever he's at the table. President Trump is in command, and thanks to the Prime Minister, Canada is a mere onlooker. Why is the Prime Minister so proud of this historic humiliation? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, under our watch, trade relations with the United States has resisted a great threat. We've signed a good deal for Canadians, but the Conservatives can't make their mind up. At first, they wanted to abdicate at all costs just to get any old deal. Then they supported the deal that we signed and supported its ratification, but they're all over the map on this. This government will defend Canadian workers and protect jobs. We will always be there for Canadians. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, let's remember, this Prime Minister promised a better NAFTA deal. And then he volunteered to renegotiate Canada's trading arrangement, and not only did he come back with concession after concession, with no wins at all, but he even signed a deal that still had steel and aluminum tariffs in place. And now we learn that there is language in the new agreement that suggests that Canada now has a quota by another name. So will the Prime Minister finally admit that this deal on steel tariffs is just not as advertised?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, under our government, the United States trading relationship faced its greatest threat. So we worked hard to get a good deal for Canadians. Now, Conservatives can't make up their minds. In the beginning, they were in favor of us signing any old deal just to get things done and abdicating on it all the way Stephen Harper told them to. Then they opposed the good deal that we signed, that we negotiated with the help of all Canadians, and now they're in favor of the deal and they commit to ratifying it. They're all over the place, Mr. Speaker. We're staying focused on supporting Canadians, on fighting for workers.
Order. Allowed. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The greatest threat to Canada's trading relationship with the United States is the weakness of this Prime Minister. Any old deal would have been better than the deal that he came home with. Concession after concession after concession on dairy, on autos, on pharmaceuticals. And now, in order to get steel tariffs lifted, Mr. Speaker, he had to give away the only piece of leverage that Canada had. He's actually agreed not to put strategic tariffs on other U.S. industries. So once again, Mr. Speaker, why did the Prime Minister give Donald Trump...
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Stephen Harper told everyone, no matter what, just abdicate to the United States. And that's exactly what the Conservatives were recommending we did. We stood strong alongside all Canadians, and we got a good deal for Canadians the way they expected it. But don't take any lessons from the Conservatives on trade. They couldn't get CETA done. They couldn't get the TPP done. It was this government that made sure that we are the only G7 country with a free trade deal with every other G7 country. That's what
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, the Prime Minister's decision to appoint Unifor on his panel to determine eligibility for $500 million bailout package has destroyed this government's credibility. Unifor is a highly partisan group with aggressive partisan goals. They have made it clear that their objective is to help elect Liberals and defeat Conservatives. And yet this Prime Minister has decided to appoint this group to his panel. So why doesn't the Prime Minister just admit that he's openly trying to stack the deck in advance of the next election?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We know that a strong independent media is essential to the functioning of a healthy democracy. That is why we wanted to make sure on our independent panel that, unlike what the Conservatives want, it's not just newspaper owners and media giants that are on that panel. We need to make sure that hardworking journalists are well represented on that panel as well. But on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we will always defend labor. We will always defend workers, unlike the Conservatives that attack organized labor at every chance they get, including with 525 and 377 in the last Parliament.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, Jerry Diaz is not a journalist. He represents a union that has called itself the Resistance to Conservatives. It's bankrolling partisan attack ads put out by a third-party organization and run by high-level Liberal backroom veterans. There are other entities that could represent workers on this panel, but they chose to choose a Liberal-friendly partisan organization. Right. Now, it's very clear that this is just one aspect in the Prime Minister's attempt to rig the next election, including putting caps on Conservatives, but not on government spending announcements. Why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will make no apologies for putting forward an opportunity to build a strong independent media that is secure as we move forward, that makes sure that both employers and employees are represented. But Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely laughable that the Conservatives, who were found guilty of election fraud in multiple past elections, give any lessons on independence. What they tried to do with their Unfair Elections Act was muzzle Elections Canada and preventing it from talking to young people, removing the right to vote from thousands of Aboriginal people, thousands of young people, right.
Order. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada's opioid crisis has claimed the lives of thousands of people of all ages and in all regions. Thousands of families have lost loved ones. And tragically, experts say this crisis was avoidable. BC has launched a groundbreaking lawsuit, and now other provinces are joining in. Again, provinces are leading the way while Liberals are trying to catch up. Will the Prime Minister finally agree to join this lawsuit and make sure drug companies are held to account for their role in this public health crisis?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are deeply concerned by the tragic impact of the opioid crisis in BC and indeed right across the country. We've responded by investing $350 million in emergency response, much of it in treatment. We've restored harm reduction and approved almost 30 supervised consumption sites, and we're significantly removing barriers to treatment of those struggling with addictions. We are taking action to do all we can to save lives and turn the tide of this terrible crisis.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. All across the country, too many families are losing loved ones because of the public health crisis caused by opioids. The NDP in BC has launched a class action against drug companies for their role in this opioid crisis. And now Ontario is joining the class action. Will the Prime Minister have the courage to support our call for an inquiry into the role of drug companies in the opioid crisis in order to do justice to the families? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are with the families in this crisis. We will continue to take action. We've invested $350 million in emergency relief, especially in the area of treatment. We have set up and are removing barriers to treatment and injection sites. We will continue to do whatever we can to save lives and turn the tide on this terrible crisis. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. NAFTA will have significant effects on workers, but the Liberals can fix the deal. As the national director of the Metal Workers Union has said, Canada shouldn't leave it up to U.S. Democrats to defend our workers. It's our job to protect jobs in Canada. Will the Prime Minister work with us and not rush to ratify NAFTA so that all workers in Canada are protected? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government shows daily that we are there to defend Canadian workers and their jobs, and that's what we've negotiated here with the new NAFTA. In the House of Commons, the NDP criticizes the deal, but privately, they say that the new NAFTA is the best possible deal. They know that the new NAFTA will protect millions of jobs that were under threat. And the member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie said that the new NAFTA was the best possible deal that protects workers all across the country.
Old misleading quotes don't change the fact that people are concerned about lost jobs and rising drug costs. Now here's a new quote. Canada continues to stand alone in failing to protect our key industries. The federal government must defend Canadian jobs. We do not support the rush to ratify. That's from Ken Newman of the United Steelworkers. Why is the Prime Minister propping up Donald Trump instead of working with progressives in a Congress to get a better deal? When exactly did he give up on trying to do better?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Who I listened to, Mr. Speaker. I listened to Hassan Youssef of the Canadian Labour Congress, who said the updated NAFTA gets it right on labour provisions, including provisions to protect workers against employment discrimination on the basis of gender. I listened to Lino Medicio, a team leader at Chrysler's Windsor Assembly Plant, who said, we're actually very proud of the job that our Canadian government did, and kudos to the negotiator. And, of course, our friend Jerry Dias of Unifor said, this is a much better deal than the deal that was signed 24 years ago.
Order. Everyone's having a good time. Order. The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's decision to put his friend Jerry Dias and the Unifor on the media funding panel, he's not my friend, I'm not sure how to say his name, it's going to show how far the Liberals would go trying to stack the deck in the next election. Unifor is overtly anti-conservative. They're planning to campaign against us in the next election. No one's denying that. I guess that's why he's the Prime Minister's friend. But they have no business being on this media panel decision-making process. Will the Prime Minister reverse this decision and remove his friend and Unifor from this media panel?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we know that a strong and independent media is the cornerstone of Canadian democracy, so we are acting to ensure that the media continue to hold elected officials to account. As part of that, we are ensuring that both employers and employees are represented on this independent panel. The Conservatives keep up their attacks on organized labor. We will defend workers right across this country. The Conservatives will keep up their attacks on the media, including on CBC, that the Leader of the Opposition committed to eliminate. We're going to stay focused on protecting the media.
Order. We need to hear both the questions and the answers. I ask members to cooperate and show respect for each other. The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister actually respected journalists, he would know that they don't want his friend Jerry and Unifor involved in this $500 million funding. Here's what they're saying about the impact it's going to have. They're saying it's disastrous for public trust. It erodes the independence and places us, journalists, in a permanent and inescapable conflict of interest. The Prime Minister is making a terrible decision, and he's using journalists as his cover. Will the Prime Minister stop putting journalists in this conflict of interest, reverse this decision, remove his friend Jerry and Unifor from this panel?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, but the arguments that the Conservatives are making on this issue are exactly the same arguments they've always been making on why we should be eliminating the CBC. Well, we disagree, Mr. Speaker. We believe in CBC Radio-Canada as a strong public broadcaster with a mandate to bring news that matters to Canadians, and we're always going to stand up to defend the CBC against the Conservatives, but indeed defend both employers and employees of media organizations against people who want to undermine them and attack them, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Richmond-Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, Unifor, the largest union of journalists in Canada, has clearly taken sides. They have declared war on the Conservative Party. And what have the Liberals done? 5 months before the election, the Prime Minister has put his Unifor pals on a panel deciding how to divvy up $600 million in handouts to the media all across Canada. It's complete nonsense. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing and take Unifor off the panel? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that independent, strong media are essential to any democracy, and we will continue to act to protect them. We recognize that it's not just employers, but also employees who need to have a voice in how we defend our media. Conservatives just want to help the bosses and the owners of media out, but we're concerned about the journalists and the workers as well. We will always defend our media, allow them to do their job of criticizing and giving Canadians the news they want. The honourable member for Richmond-Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, this is misinformation. The fact is that this Liberal government has given an openly pro-Liberal union power over the distribution of $600 million in handouts to the media just 5 months before the election. This is yet another Liberal scheme to interfere and influence the next election. So would this Prime Minister just do the right thing and get rid of his Unifor cronies on this panel? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that the Conservative attacks against unions continue, but we also know that they're an essential part of our society. They have a role to play. It's very important. At the same time, we see that the Conservatives are using the same arguments on this as they did to argue that CBC should be completely scrapped. This is the same type of argument they use all the time. The Conservative leader made these promises in his leadership campaign. We know that the Conservatives are always itching to get rid of CBC.
So, Mr. Speaker, despite the protests of the Prime Minister, the issue here is one of bias. And the question is whether or not an entity that has sworn that it likes to elect Liberals and, in fact, make sure that Conservatives don't form government, who gave $400,000 and boasted about it to ensure the Conservative defeat in 2015, and as well says they're doing it again and, in fact, has started again, that is not an appropriate appointment to a panel that's making decisions on who gets journalistic money. Yes. Will the Prime Minister remove Unifor from this panel?
Honourable Prime Minister.
To follow the Conservatives' logic, anyone who has been attacked and mistreated by the Conservatives shouldn't have a voice. Well, you know what? That's what the 2015 election countered, as Canadians rose up across the country to reject the Conservative attacks and demonization of media, of Indigenous peoples, of environmentalists, of hardworking Canadians, of young people. That approach by the Conservatives is exactly what is going to fail them again this time.
No. Quieter, everybody. Quieter. Quieter. Order. 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 The honourable member for Milton.
So, Mr. Speaker, this is actually embarrassing that the Prime Minister doesn't understand the concept of bias on a panel that's making decisions, but I shouldn't be surprised. This is the same Prime Minister who thinks it's okay to traipse across the line that separates the judicial system from the executive function of government. This is the same Prime Minister who thinks thinks that ethical rules do not apply to him. This is the same Prime Minister who also made sure that he set up beforehand exactly what the outcome for Mark Norman would have been in terms of being charged. I take no lessons from this Prime Minister. Will he remove Unifor?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, defending our strong independent media is something that is essential to this government, indeed to all Canadians, if we're going to defend our democracy. And that means gathering a range of voices that represent different interests within the media universe to make sure that all voices are heard. And we, Mr. Speaker, feel that it is important that employees as well as employers are heard from on that panel. The fact that the Conservatives for many, many years unfairly attacked organized labor, attacked unions across this country, is now something they're complaining.
The Honourable Member for Essex.
Rushing the ratification of the new NAFTA as it stands will hurt workers, communities, and our environment. While Congress in the U.S. is fighting for a better deal, the Liberals are busy doing Donald Trump's dirty work. Do Liberals understand how much NAFTA has cost working people? We do, because unlike the Prime Minister, we work shoulder to shoulder with people who lost their jobs. This Prime Minister has no idea what this does to families. Liberals are telling working people that they are more interested in a trophy on the trade shelf than they are in improving their lives. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing for working people and wait for a better deal?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the negotiation of NAFTA was a long and difficult process, but throughout we could count on Canadians from all different backgrounds who had our backs as a government, and that was one of the reasons we got to a great deal. I was happy that we had former Conservative cabinet ministers supporting us on this. I was also happy that we had so many strong Labour leaders supporting us, helping us in the negotiation of the renegotiation of NAFTA. That's why I thank organized Labour for their support of this new deal and continue to work with them to protect Canadian jobs.
Honourable Member for the Smithfield Churchill River.
Mr. Speaker, in February, the Minister announced funding to make much-needed safety improvements to the Fond du Lac Airport. But now they're telling the community that they need to apply again. Wow. For already promised funding. The Liberals are really quick to make promises for Northerners, but they act more like the Conservatives who never cared to invest in Northern Saskatchewan. Exactly. Northerners are tired of being betrayed by the Liberals. Will the Prime Minister commit to his promise to Fond du Lac and release the funding today?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I had the tremendous pleasure of being in Northern Saskatchewan just a week and a half ago to meet with folks in Meadow Lake, to see the extraordinary work that's being done as we continue to invest in communities across Northern Saskatchewan. Indeed, as we continue to invest in Indigenous communities right across the country. Reconciliation happens when we work in partnership, when we invest historic amounts of money in communities, but mostly when we give communities the strength and ability to build their own futures. That is what reconciliation means, and that's what we will continue with.
The member for Brantford Brant.
The Liberals have been forced to confirm that they are cutting benefits for veterans with severe and permanent injuries under this Prime Minister's Veterans Pension Scheme. Veterans like Medrick Cousineau have received letters.
Remember that apparently there's a problem with the interpretation at the moment. Is it working now? I'd ask the member to begin again.
The Liberals have been forced to confirm that they are cutting benefits for veterans with severe and permanent injuries under this Prime Minister's Veterans Pension Scheme. Veterans like Medrick Cousineau have received letters that provide the proof of the Prime Minister's betrayal.
Disgusting.
Even Liberal members of Parliament are calling this unacceptable. Does the Prime Minister agree with his Liberal MP from Nova Scotia, or does he still think veterans are asking for too much?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the well-being and financial security of our veterans has been our priority ever since we took office, because the Conservatives gutted Veterans Affairs to balance the budget and used them for photo walks. Well, we made our investments of over $10 billion new dollars in our Canada's veterans, so they're better supported. We're delivering on the promise to reintroduce the new pension for life, and that policy was designed so that every injured veteran is better off under our new system than they were under the old one, and I have instructed Veterans Affairs to ensure that that is the case in every single case.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le Mr. Speaker, Medrick Cousineau has joined the chorus of voices saying not all veterans are being treated equally under the Pension for Life program. A Nova Scotia Liberal MP said if any veteran received less, that would be unacceptable. I recall the Prime Minister saying that what veterans were asking for was more than the government could afford. Does the Prime Minister agree with what one of his own MPs said? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The financial security and well-being of our veterans has always been our absolute priority. The Conservatives made cuts to services to veterans in an effort to balance the books at all costs. We have invested over $10 billion in greater support for veterans, keeping our promise to introduce a new pension for life. And under this policy, all veterans should be better off than they were under the old system. And I've asked the department to ensure that that is always the case. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is our head of government. He wears a lot of hats, of course, but his primary duty is made up of two fundamental goals. First, he must ensure the political unity of our federation. And secondly, he must ensure the government is there for our soldiers, including by giving them the recognition they deserve. Did the Prime Minister share Canadians and our soldiers' profound disappointment when he learned that the families of the fallen were excluded from a war memorial ceremony? Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we thank the men and women who served in Afghanistan for their work and sacrifice. The Chief of the Defence Staff has apologized and confirmed that the memorial would be accessible to those who wish to visit it. And we're working on a public monument to those who served in Afghanistan for families and veterans. That monument will be built in cooperation with the National Capital Commission. We will always defend and remember the sacrifices of our veterans.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister asks the Chief of Defence Staff to apologize for him, but he's the Prime Minister who's broken promises on veterans' pensions. He's the Prime Minister that forced Equitas Afghanistan veterans back to court. He's the Prime Minister that cancelled the Afghanistan monument in 2016 that would be open to the public today. And barring families and veterans from a secret ceremony a few weeks ago was reprehensible, Mr. Speaker. 4 years of broken promises, 4 ineffective ministers. Why should military families and veterans ever believe this Prime Minister?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We'll take no lessons on ineffective ministers from that man who was the one who presided over the kinds of photo ops, the cuts to veteran services under the Harper government. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, they used veterans for photo ops, Mr. Speaker, instead of giving them the money they had. So to balance the budget by nickel and diming them, we knew what we were going to do was invest $10 billion in veterans, and the new Veterans Pension for Life makes sure that every single veteran is better off now, and that's what we're going to stick with.
Order.
Alors.
Order.
Honorable. Order. L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, in its 2013 report on a collision between a bus and a Via Rail train, the TSB called on Transport Canada to examine potential collision performance standards for buses. Since then, there have been several similar accidents, including the sad tragedy of the Humboldt Broncos. The number is now 19 dead and 33 injured, and despite that, Transport Canada still has done nothing to change the collision performance standards for buses. Mr. Speaker, after almost 4 years in government, how can the Prime Minister explain his minister's lack of action on this matter? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, the Minister of Transport has been very active on new standards and new ways of bringing in measures to protect Canadians. This is his priority, and it's the priority for this government, and that is to make sure that Canadians and Canadian travelers are safe when they travel internationally and in this country. We'll continue to put Canadian safety first, and we will take the necessary steps to make sure that that will always be the case. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, a delegation from Saguenay today is visiting Davie Shipyard to send a clear message that the shipyard is ready for new federal contracts and businesses in our region are ready to participate. Contracts are slow in coming, and therefore, so are all the potential economic benefits. Mr. Speaker, will the Liberals commit to doing everything necessary to make sure that Davie has a new contract before the next election and to therefore pave the way for economic benefits in our region? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we recognize the excellent work of Davie Shipyard. They are always on time and on budget. The Conservatives had excluded Davie from their national shipbuilding strategy, but we have granted $1.5 billion in contracts in businesses in Quebec and over $700 million and in other places. We are always going to make sure that there are contracts, and we have invested in 2 new ships so far, and including on the East Coast.
Mr. Speaker, gun violence in Canada is on the rise. While crime rates in general have dropped during the past several decades, gun violence has increased. Between 2013 and 2017, gun homicides across Canada doubled. More specifically, in my hometown of Toronto, we endured 96 tragic homicides in 2018.
Too many.
Could the Prime Minister inform this House what steps our government has taken to promote the safety of our communities?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Willowdale for his question and for his hard work. All of us can agree that one loss of life is too many. So yesterday, our legislation passed to uphold our commitment for better background checks, for standardized record keeping, for impartial classification, and for safer transportation. Now, Conservatives have said they would repeal this legislation. Well, if Conservatives remove enhanced background checks, people will no longer need to show a license when buying a firearm in Canada. So, together with new federal investments, this bill will combat gun violence and
Order. I remind members the time to show the disagreement with something is when they have the floor, and not by interrupting when someone else does, and that's rude. The Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's failure to get Trans Mountain built has contributed to high sky gas prices in British Columbia. However, he says that is exactly what he wants. So for rural people in my riding, they have no options. They cannot take public transit. They can't take jerry cans across for cheaper gas in the U.S. When you have to drive hundreds of kilometers to simply get to a hospital, electric vehicles remain impractical. When will the Prime Minister take real steps to address the issue of high gas prices?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know getting our oil resources to new markets is something that matters to Canadians right across the country and will help people in British Columbia. Unfortunately, for 10 years, the Conservatives failed to get pipelines built to new markets. Their approach was to bulldoze through environmental protection, ignore Indigenous peoples, and they completely failed to get their exports to non-U.S. markets. We are following the court direction on TMX in the right way. We're diversifying our exports to support our workers because, quite frankly, families in Alberta and BC and elsewhere can't afford Conservative failure.
Member for Abbotsford.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are worried about carbon taxes and the skyrocketing price of gas at the pumps. The Prime Minister himself has said, quote, "That's exactly what we want," end quote. The Liberals' own secret documents show they plan to raise the carbon tax by another 60 cents per litre. When will the Prime Minister admit that his carbon tax is nothing more than a blatant cash grab that will hurt struggling Canadians?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's been almost 400 days since the Leader of the Opposition promised a plan to fight climate change. And all they've been doing is dragging their feet and encouraging their friends to take the government to court instead of fighting climate change. I was happy to note, Mr. Speaker, that 97% of Canadians eligible for the climate incentive actually collected that, which means families are better off with our price on pollution than they were before as we fight climate change, because Canadians know we have to fight climate change to build a strong economy.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, the Prime Minister is following the direction of his Environment Minister, who said this week, if you actually say it louder, we've learned in the House of Commons, if you repeat it, if you say it louder, if that is your talking point, people will totally believe it. So just go it.
Order. Honourable Member for Carleton has the floor. Order.
Start again.
Even they're following the plan of the Liberal Environment Minister, screaming louder and louder to cover up the truth. The Prime Minister said $1.60 a litre gas prices in BC are exactly what he wants. Will he admit that that is where all prices are going across Canada once his carbon tax is fully implemented?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, once again, the Conservatives are playing the same old game of trying to pit Canadians against each other and distract from the fact that climate change is a real and pressing challenge to communities right across the country. Extreme wildfires, the incredible flooding right across the country, greater drought periods. These are challenges that are costing Canadian families thousands upon thousands of dollars, and the economy millions upon billions of dollars. We have a plan to fight climate change. We know that you don't have a plan to build a stronger economy unless you have a plan to fight climate change. The Conservatives don't know that.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
We know is that whether it's on climate change or gas prices, we don't need another high school drama production from this Prime Minister. We need clear answers. He said that he believed $1.60 a litre gas prices are exactly what we want. His price on gas will go up 250%, he admits. So will he tell us what is the full and final price increase that his carbon tax will impose on a litre of gasoline?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives do nothing but flail about because they have nothing to counter the fact that our plan is working. 1 million jobs created over the past 4 years, the lowest unemployment in 40 years, 825,000 Canadians lifted out of poverty, including 300,000 kids. And we've done this because we know that investing in the middle class, protecting the environment, and working with all Canadians is the way to build a stronger future and a stronger economy. They have nothing to say on that, so they resort to personal attacks and scary division tactics.
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay. Order.
Speaker, the people of Grassy Narrows have suffered 50 years of lies, cover-ups, and broken promises. 2 years ago, this Prime Minister promised that spring there would be shovels in the ground to build the Mercury Treatment Centre, and nothing was done. So enough of the broken promises. To the Prime Minister, where's the money? Where's the money for the Mercury Treatment Centre? What is the timeline, and why is he refusing to cover the treatment for people who've been poisoned by the corporate and political crime at Grassy Narrows?
Well, Prime Minister.
Recognize the numerous health issues that the community suffers to this day. We remain steadfast in our commitment to build a health facility in Grassy Narrows. At the invitation of Chief Turtle, the Minister is actually visiting the community today. We're focused on moving this critical work forward, working with the community to advance a solution. It's imperative that we all work together and ensure the people of Grassy Narrows get the support they need.
Member for Windsor West.
Canadians would like to take pride in our exports. My hometown produces an award-winning electric vehicle that we are proud to ship worldwide. But this Prime Minister is undermining Canada's reputation when he allows hundreds of garbage containers of household waste, plastics, and recyclables to be dumped to rot in other countries. When the Environment Minister was called out by the Philippines and Malaysia, the response is its own dumpster fire, as Canadian taxpayers now have to pay millions of dollars to pick up these companies' trash. The PM won't sign the Basil Ban Amendment agreement to stop companies from doing this. So will he inform the House how many more countries he will allow to be his personal dumping destinations?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we agree with the NDP that it was shameful that the Harper government allowed garbage to be exported without permits or safeguards. That's why in 2016 we signed the Basel Agreement, so the NDP needs to get its facts straight on that lever. We changed our regulations to comply with international obligations and strengthen controls of our exports. Despite this garbage having been exported to the Philippines under the Harper government, we are doing the right thing and bringing it back to Canada to ensure that it is properly disposed of.
The Honourable Member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, 2 men were recently arrested in Richmond Hill for possessing explosive materials. At the time, the Minister of Public Safety dismissed the incident, claiming it was not a national security matter. But we've since learned that the FBI is investigating. Wow. Everybody knows that the FBI doesn't waste their time investigating trivial matters. Will the Prime Minister be transparent about this national security issue in my riding and provide this House with an update on the investigation?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government takes very seriously the responsibility to keep Canadians safe, and that's why I can assure all members of this House that our security agencies, that our RCMP take to heart their responsibility to make sure that Canadians are well protected, and they are following all the appropriate procedures in every case. We have full confidence in the excellence of our intelligence agencies and our police services.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Cher. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Public Safety said that this was not a national security matter, but now we've learned that the FBI is involved. So, can the Prime Minister confirm that this is a national security matter? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we take very seriously the security of Canadians, and that's why we have full confidence in our security agencies to do the work they need to do to keep Canadians safe. We will not comment on investigations, but we can reassure Canadians, and we'll continue to do that our agencies are doing what they need to do to keep Canadians safe. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Another national security question, Mr. Speaker. We learned that there were cartel members crossing the border to come and do business here. Now, we know that 190 criminals have been arrested. However, there are drug traffickers and contract killers who are still here living in Canada. This government said it would be open and transparent. So, can he tell us the truth about this matter? Since January 2019, the exemptions for visas meant that there have been thousands of legitimate visitors from Mexico. This has generated billions of dollars in economic benefits. At the same time, the CSBA has also deported over 190 Mexicans for criminality reasons, but that represents 0.04% of all people who have asked for entry from Mexico. We collaborate with our international and foreign partners, and the exchange of information. The Honourable Member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, this is National Accessibility Week, and I'm proud of the work our government has done since 2015 and the investments that it has made in accessibility in the riding of Shefford and throughout the country. We celebrate the achievements of Canadians with disabilities and the work being done throughout the country to make sure everyone has equal opportunities to succeed. Can the Prime Minister tell the House what our government has done to bring about real change and help remove barriers to inclusion? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Shefford for his question and for all his hard work. In Budget 2019, we made significant investments to better support Canadians with disabilities. Contrary to the Conservatives, we made our accessibility legislation a priority, and that will help identify and remove obstacles, because we want to build a country where everyone can fully participate in society. And we hope that all political parties will support our legislation.
Prime Minister's hand-picked senators have sole-sourced a contract to a private security company to provide extra bodyguards in the new Senate chamber. When questions were asked about this contract, all of the men in black, the private mystery security agents, were all sent home. Mr. Speaker, there's something rotten in the Senate. Why did the Prime Minister's appointed leader of the Liberal government in the Senate break the rules and issue this untendered secret contract?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for a decade, Canadians saw how the Conservatives mistreated the institution that was the Senate, torqued it, used it for its own particular gain, pushed partisanship, pushed patronage in the Senate with senators such as Lynn Bayek, such as Don Meredith, such as others. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, we move forward on removing partisanship and patronage from the Senate. It is now a more independent body of truly sober second thought, and we wish the Conservatives would commit to ending their perspective patronage in the Senate.
Order. The Honourable Member for South. Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope has spoken often today, but he hasn't had the floor. I'd ask him to wait until he has the floor. I'll leave that up to other times. The Honourable Member for South Okanagan West Kootenay. Order.
Mr. Speaker, BC gives low-income seniors a bus pass.
Continue to invest in seniors, particularly in housing, with our national housing strategy of $40 billion moving forward. We're making sure that seniors find life more affordable, because we know that supporting our seniors through a broad range of investments is the right thing for our society and the right thing for our future.
Honourable Member for Hamilton East, Stony Creek. Order.
Mr. Speaker, Hamilton is Canada's steel city. The imposition of steel tariffs by the United States caused us great concern, here and throughout North America. We fought back with retaliatory tariffs, which the Conservative member for Durham described as dumb. But we held firm. And now the tariffs are fully lifted, protecting thousands of steelworkers' jobs across Canada. Could the Prime Minister speak to the House about this important achievement?
Prime Minister.
Hamilton East Stony Creek for his leadership on the steel file and for his question. I was incredibly happy to be able to visit plants in Hamilton, in Sault Ste. Marie, and in Sept-Îles to tell workers directly about this huge win for Canada, and also to thank them for standing steadfast around while we made sure that the United States lifted these unfair tariffs. When our steel and aluminum workers needed to be defended, we stood up and put over $16 billion in retaliatory tariffs against the United States. Despite what members opposite and the Premier of Ontario said, we still held strong.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's been 59 days since the Prime Minister sent me a letter threatening to sue me for comments I made regarding his political interference in the SNC-Lavalin affair. Now, not only did I not withdraw or apologize for my remarks, I repeated them word for word outside of the House of Commons. So, will the Prime Minister tell me on what date I can expect to see him in court testifying under oath for his role in the SNC-Lavalin affair?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
In a time of misinformation and fake news and populism, the opposition leader doubling down on misleading Canadians. It shows that he's still following Stephen Harper's playbook. We put him on notice because he and his party have a history of making false and defamatory statements. That's what he did in December against the Minister of Innovation. He was forced to swallow his words and retract his statements. Well, we will not stand by while he tries to mislead Canadians again.
Order. Order. Alors.
Order.
Alors.
Order.
L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the National Assembly adopted a motion, a unanimous motion, reiterating that any oil transport project is subject to the BAP's environmental review. But Ottawa doesn't understand that. Over here, national interest equals oil company interests, period. So we repeat. Quebec does not want a pipeline full of dirty oil. We don't want one. I think that's clear. Will the Prime Minister guarantee that he will not revive the dirty oil pipeline project in Quebec? Yes or no? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that all Canadians want us to have a plan to protect the environment and grow the economy at the same time, and that's exactly what we're doing. We put a price on pollution. We invested in renewable energy. We invested in new technology. We have new parks, new marine protected areas, and we'll continue to defend the environment while making sure that we have the lowest unemployment rate in 40 years, 1 million new jobs, economic growth that is one of the best in the G7. We know that the economy and the environment can go hand in hand, and that's what we're showing.
I would like